Section 4 of the Commission in Lunacy by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Clara Bell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bruce Perry. Next day, at 4 in the afternoon, a very stout dame, looking a good deal like a cask, dressed up in a gown and belt, mounted Judge Popinot's stairs, perspiring and panting. She had, with great difficulty, got out of a green landau, which suited her to a miracle. You could not think of the woman without the landau, or the landau without the woman. "It is I, my dear sir," said she, appearing in the doorway of the judge's room. "Madame Jean Renaud, whom you summoned exactly as if I were a thief, neither more nor less." The common words were spoken in a common voice, broken by the wheezing of asthma, and ending in a cough. "When I go through a damp place, I can't tell you what I suffer, sir. I shall never make old bones, saving your presence. However, here I am." The lawyer was quite amazed at the appearance of this supposed Maréchal d'Ancre. Madame Jean Renaud's face was pitted with an infinite number of little holes, was very red, with a pug nose and a low forehead, and was as round as a ball, for everything about the good woman was round. She had the bright eyes of a country woman, an honest gaze, a cheerful tone, and chestnut hair held in place by a bonnet cap under a green bonnet decked with a shabby bunch of auriculas. Her stupendous bust was a thing to laugh at, for it made one fear some grotesque explosion every time she coughed. Her enormous legs were of the shape which make the Paris street boy describe such a woman as being built on piles. The widow wore a green gown trimmed with chinchilla, which looked on her as a splash of dirty oil would look on a bride's veil. In short, everything about her harmonized with her last words. "Here I am." "Madame," said Popinot, "you are suspected of having used some seductive arts to induce Monsieur d'Espard to hand over to you very considerable sums of money." "Of what? Of what?" cried she. "Of seductive arts? But, my dear sir, you are a man to be respected, and moreover, as a lawyer, you ought to have some good sense. Look at me. Tell me if I am likely to seduce any one. I cannot tie my own shoes, nor even stoop. For the 20 years past, the Lord be praised, I have not dared to put on a pair of stays under pain of sudden death. I was as thin as an asparagus stalk when I was 17, and pretty, too, I may say so now. So I married Jean Renaud, a good fellow, and head man on the salt barges. I had my boy, who is a fine young man, he is my pride, and it is not holding myself cheap to say he is my best piece of work. My little Jean Renaud was a soldier who did Napoleon credit, and who served in the Imperial Guard. But alas, at the death of my old man, who was drowned, times changed for the worse. I had the smallpox, I was kept 2 years in my room without stirring, and I came out of it the size you see me, hideous forever, and as wretched as could be. These are my seductive arts." "But what then can the reasons be that have induced Monsieur d'Espard to give you sums?" "Hugeous sums, monsieur, say the word, I do not mind. But as to his reasons, I am not at liberty to explain them." "You are wrong. At this moment his family, very naturally alarmed, are about to bring an action." "Heavens above us!" said the good woman, starting up. "Is it possible that he should be worried on my account? That king of men, a man that has not his match. Rather than he should have the smallest trouble, or hair less on his head, I could almost say, we would return every sou, monsieur. Write that down on your papers. Heaven above us! I will go at once and tell Jean Renaud what is going on. A pretty thing indeed!" And the little old woman went out, rolled herself downstairs, and disappeared. "That one tells no lies," said Popinot to himself. "Well, tomorrow I shall know the whole story, for I shall go to see the Marquis d'Espard." People who have outlived the age when a man wastes his vitality at random know how great an influence may be exercised on more important events by apparently trivial incidents, and will not be surprised at the weight here given to the following minor fact. Next day Popinot had an attack of coryza, a complaint which is not dangerous, and generally known by the absurd and inadequate name of a cold in the head. The judge, who could not suppose that the delay could be serious, feeling himself a little feverish, kept his room, and did not go to see the Marquis d'Espard. This day lost was to this affair what on the day of dupes the cup of soup had been, given by Marie de Medici, which, by delaying her meeting with Louis XIII., enabled Richelieu to arrive at Saint-Germain before her, and recapture his royal slave. Before accompanying the lawyer and his registering clerk to the Marquis d'Espard's house, it may be as well to glance at the home and the private affairs of this father of sons, whom his wife's petition represented to be a madman. Here and there in the old parts of Paris a few buildings may still be seen in which the archaeologist can discern an intention of decorating the city, and that love of property which leads the owner to give a durable character to the structure. The house in which M. d'Espard was then living, in the Rue de la Montagne Sainte Geneviève, was one of these old mansions, built in stone, and not devoid of a certain richness of style. But time had blackened the stone, and revolutions in the town had damaged it both outside and inside. The dignitaries who formerly dwelt in the neighbourhood of the university having disappeared with the great ecclesiastical foundations, this house had become the home of industries, and of inhabitants whom it was never destined to shelter. During the last century, a printing establishment had worn down the polished floors, soiled the carved wood, blackened the walls, and altered the principal internal arrangements. Formerly the residence of a cardinal, this fine house was now divided among plebeian tenants. The character of the architecture showed that it had been built under the reigns of Henri III, Henri IV, and Louis XIII, at the time when the hôtels Mignon and Serpente were erected in the same neighbourhood, with the palace of the Princess Palatine and the Sorbonne. An old man could remember having heard it called, in the last century, the Hôtel du Perron, so it seemed probable that the illustrious cardinal of that name had built, or perhaps merely lived in it. There still exists, indeed, in the corner of the courtyard, a perron, or flight of several outer steps by which the house is entered, and the way into the garden on the garden front is down a similar flight of steps. In spite of dilapidations, the luxury lavished by the architect on the balustrade and entrance porch crowning these two perrons suggests the simple-minded purpose of commemorating the owner's name, a sort of sculptured pun which our ancestors often allowed themselves. Finally, in support of this evidence, archaeologists can still discern in the medallions which show on the principal front some traces of the cords of the Roman hat. Monsieur le Marquis d'Espard lived on the ground floor, in order, no doubt, to enjoy the garden, which might be called spacious for that neighbourhood, and which lay open for his children's health. The situation of the house, in a street on a steep hill, as its name indicates, secured these ground-floor rooms against ever being damp. Monsieur d'Espard had taken them, no doubt, for a very moderate price, rents being low at the time when he settled in that quarter, in order to be among the schools and to superintend the boys' education. Moreover, the state in which he found the place, with everything to repair, had no doubt induced the owner to be accommodating. Thus Monsieur d'Espard had been able to go to some expense to settle himself suitably without being accused of extravagance. The loftiness of the rooms, the panelling, of which nothing survived but the frames, the decoration of the ceilings, all displayed the dignity which the prelacy stamped on whatever it attempted or created, and which artists discern to this day in the smallest relic that remains, though it be but a book, a dress, the panel of a bookcase, or an armchair. The Marquis had the rooms painted in the rich brown tones loved of the Dutch and of the citizens of old Paris, hues which lend such good effects to the painter of genre. The panels were hung with plain paper in harmony with the paint. The window curtains were of inexpensive materials, but chosen so as to produce a generally happy result. The furniture was not too crowded and judiciously placed. Anyone, on going into this home, could not resist a sense of sweet peacefulness, produced by the perfect calm, the stillness which prevailed, by the unpretentious unity of colour, the keeping of the picture, in the words a painter might use. A certain nobleness in the details, the exquisite cleanliness of the furniture, and a perfect concord of men and things, all brought the word suavity to the lips. Few persons were admitted to the rooms used by the Marquis and his two sons, whose life might perhaps seem mysterious to their neighbours. In a wing towards the street, on the third floor, there are 3 large rooms which had been left in the state of dilapidation and grotesque bareness to which they had been reduced by the printing works. These 3 rooms, devoted to the evolution of the picturesque history of China, were contrived to serve as a writing room, a depository, and a private room, where Monsieur d'Espard sat during part of the day. For after breakfast, till 4 in the afternoon, the Marquis remained in this room on the 3rd floor to work at the publication he had undertaken. Visitors wanting to see him commonly found him there, and often the 2 boys, on their return from school, resorted thither. Thus the ground-floor rooms were a sort of sanctuary where the father and sons spent their time from the hour of dinner till the next day, and his domestic life was carefully closed against the public eye. His only servants were a cook, an old woman who had long been attached to his family, and a man-servant 40 years old, who was with him when he married Mademoiselle de Blamont. His children's nurse had also remained with them, and the minute care to which the apartment bore witness revealed the sense of order and the maternal affections expended by this woman in her master's interest, in the management of his house and the charge of his children. These 3 good souls, grave and uncommunicative folk, seemed to have entered into the idea which ruled the Marquis's domestic life, and the contrast between their habits and those of most servants was a peculiarity which cast an air of mystery over the house, and fomented the calumny to which Monsieur d'Espard himself lent occasion. Very laudable motives had made him determine never to be on visiting terms with any of the other tenants in the house. In undertaking to educate his boys, he wished to keep them from all contact with strangers. Perhaps, too, he wished to avoid the intrusion of neighbours. In a man of his rank, at a time when the Quartier Latin was distracted by liberalism, such conduct was sure to rouse in opposition a host of petty passions, of feelings whose folly is only to be measured by their meanness, the outcome of porters' gossip and malevolent tattle from door to door, all unknown to Monsieur d'Espard and his retainers. His manservant was stigmatized as a Jesuit, his cook as a sly fox, the nurse was in collusion with Madame Jeanrenaud to rob the madman was the Marquis. By degrees the other tenants came to regard as proofs of madness a number of things they had noticed in Monsieur d'Espard, and passed through the sieve of their judgment without discerning any reasonable motive for them. Having no belief in the success of the history of China, they had managed to convince the landlord of the house that Monsieur d'Espard had no money, just at a time when, with the forgetfulness which often befalls busy men, he had allowed the tax collector to send him a summons for non-payment of arrears. The landlord forthwith claimed his quarter's rent from January 1st by sending in a receipt which the porter's wife had amused herself by detaining. On the 15th a summons to pay was served on Monsieur d'Espard. The portress had delivered it at her leisure, and he supposed it to be some misunderstanding, not conceiving of any incivility from a man in whose house he had been living for 12 years. The Marquis was actually seized by a bailiff at the time when his manservant had gone to carry the money for the rent to the landlord. This arrest, assiduously reported to the persons with whom he was in treaty for his undertaking, had alarmed some of them, who were already doubtful of Monsieur d'Espard's solvency, in consequence of the enormous sums which Baron Jeanrenaud and his mother were said to be receiving from him. And indeed these suspicions on the part of the tenants, the creditors, and the landlord had some excuse in the Marquis's extreme economy in housekeeping. He conducted it as a ruined man might. His servants always paid in ready money for the most trifling necessaries of life, and acted as not choosing to take credit. If now they had asked for anything on credit, it would probably have been refused. Calumnious gossip had been so widely believed in the neighborhood. There are tradesmen who like those of their customers who pay badly when they see them often, while they hate others, and very good ones, who hold themselves on too high a level to allow of any familiarity as chums, a vulgar but expressive word. Men are made so. In almost every class they will allow to a gossip or a vulgar soul that flatters them facilities and favors they refuse to the superiority they resent, in whatever form it may show itself. The shopkeeper who rails at the court has his courtiers. In short, the manners of the Marquis and his children were certain to arouse ill feeling in their neighbors, and to work them up by degrees to the pitch of malevolence when men do not hesitate at an act of meanness, if only it may damage the adversary they have themselves created. Monsieur d'Espard was a gentleman, as his wife was a lady, by birth and breeding. Noble types, already so rare in France that the observer can easily count the persons who perfectly realize them. These two characters are based on primitive ideas, on beliefs that may be called innate, on habits formed in infancy and which have ceased to exist. To believe in pure blood, in a privileged race, to stand in thought above other men, must we not from birth have measured the distance which divides patricians from the mob? To command, must we not have never met our equal? And finally, must not education inculcate the ideas with which nature inspires those great men on whose brow she has placed a crown, before their mother has ever set a kiss there? These ideas, this education, are no longer possible in France, where for 40 years past chance has arrogated the right of making noblemen by dipping them in the blood of battles, by gilding them with glory, by crowning them with the halo of genius, where the abolition of entail and of eldest sonship, by frittering away estates, compels the nobleman to attend to his own business instead of attending to affairs of state, and where personal greatness can only be such greatness as is acquired by long and patient toil. Quite a new era. Regarded as a relic of that great institution known as feudalism, Monsieur d'Espard deserved respectful admiration. If he believed himself to be by blood the superior of other men, he also believed in all the obligations of nobility. He had the virtues and the strength it demands. He had brought up his children in his own principles, and taught them from the cradle the religion of their caste. A deep sense of their own dignity, pride of name, the conviction that they were by birth great, gave rise in them to a kingly pride, the courage of knights, and the protecting kindness of a baronial lord. Their manners, harmonizing with their notions, would have become princes, and offended all the world of the Rue de la Montagne Sainte Geneviève, a world above all others of equality, where everyone believed that Monsieur d'Espard was ruined, and where all, from the lowest to the highest, refused the privileges of nobility to a nobleman without money, because they were all ready to allow an enriched bourgeois to usurp them. Thus, the lack of communion between this family and other persons was as much moral as it was physical. In the father and the children alike, their personality harmonized with the spirit within. Monsieur d'Espard, at this time about 50, might have sat as a model to represent the aristocracy of birth in the 19th century. He was slight and fair. There was in the outline and general expression of his face a native distinction which spoke of lofty sentiments, but it bore the impress of a deliberate coldness which commanded respect a little too decidedly. His aquiline nose bent at the tip from left to right, a slight crookedness which was not devoid of grace. His blue eyes, his high forehead, prominent enough at the brows to form a thick ridge that checked the light and shaded his eyes, all indicated a spirit of rectitude, capable of perseverance and perfect loyalty, while it gave a singular look to his countenance. This penthouse forehead might, in fact, hint at a touch of madness, and his thick-knitted eyebrows added to the apparent eccentricity. He had the white, well-kept hands of a gentleman. His foot was high and narrow. His hesitating speech, not merely as to his pronunciation, which was that of a stammerer, but also in the expression of his ideas, his thought and language, produced on the mind of the hearer the impression of a man who, in familiar phraseology, comes and goes, feels his way, tries everything, breaks off his gestures, and finishes nothing. This defect was purely superficial, and in contrast with the decisiveness of a firmly set mouth and the strongly marked character of his physiognomy. His rather jerky gait matched his mode of speech. These peculiarities helped to affirm his supposed insanity. In spite of his elegant appearance, he was systematically parsimonious in his personal expenses, and wore the same black frock-coat for 3 or 4 years, brushed with extreme care by his old manservant. As to the children, they both were handsome, and endowed with a grace which did not exclude an expression of aristocratic disdain. They had the bright colouring, the clear eye, the transparent flesh which reveal habits of purity, regularity of life, and a due proportion of work and play. They both had black hair and blue eyes, and a twist in their nose like their father. But their mother, perhaps, had transmitted to them the dignity of speech, of look and mien, which are hereditary in the Blamont-Chauvries. Their voices, as clear as crystal, had an emotional quality, the softness which proves so seductive. They had, in short, the voice a woman would willingly listen to after feeling the flame of their looks. But, above all, they had the modesty of pride, a chaste reserve, a touch-me-not, which at a maturer age might have seemed intentional coyness, so much did their demeanour inspire a wish to know them. The elder, Comte Clément de Nègrepelisse, was close upon his 16th year. For the last 2 years he had ceased to wear the pretty English round jacket which his brother, Vicomte Camille d'Espard, still wore. The Count, who for the last 6 months went no more to the Collège Henri IV, was dressed in the style of a young man enjoying the first pleasures of fashion. His father had not wished to condemn him to a year's useless study of philosophy. He was trying to give his knowledge some consistency by the study of transcendental mathematics. At the same time the Marquis was having him taught Eastern languages, the international law of Europe, heraldry, and history from the original sources, charters, early documents, and collections of edicts. Camille had lately begun to study rhetoric. The day when Popinot arranged to go to question Monsieur d'Espard was a Thursday, a holiday. At about 9 in the morning, before their father was awake, the brothers were playing in the garden. Clément was finding it hard to refuse his brother, who was anxious to go to the shooting gallery for the first time, and who begged him to second his request to the Marquis. The Viscount always rather took advantage of his weakness, and was very fond of wrestling with his brother. So the couple were quarrelling and fighting in play like schoolboys. As they ran in the garden, chasing each other, they made so much noise as to wake their father, who came to the window without their perceiving him in the heat of the fray. The Marquis amused himself with watching his 2 children twisted together like snakes, their faces flushed by the exertion of their strength, their complexion was rose and white, their eyes flashed sparks, their limbs writhed like cords in the fire, they fell, sprang up again, and caught each other like athletes in a circus, affording their father one of those moments of happiness which would make amends for the keenest anxieties of a busy life. 2 other persons, one on the second and one on the first floor, were also looking into the garden, and saying that the old madman was amusing himself by making his children fight. Immediately a number of heads appeared at the windows. The Marquis, noticing them, called a word to his sons, who at once climbed up to the window and jumped into his room, and Clément obtained the permission asked by Camille. All through the house everyone was talking of the Marquis's new form of insanity. When Popinot arrived at about 12 o'clock, accompanied by his clerk, the portress, when asked for Monsieur d'Espard, conducted him to the third floor, telling him as how Monsieur d'Espard no longer ago than that very morning had set on his two children to fight, and laughed like the monster he was, on seeing the younger biting the elder till he bled, and as how no doubt he longed to see them kill each other. Don't ask me the reason why, she added, he doesn't show himself. Just as the woman spoke these decisive words, she had brought the judge to the landing on the third floor, face to face with a door covered with notices announcing the successive numbers of the picturesque history of China. The muddy floor, the dirty banisters, the door where the printers had left their marks, the dilapidated window, and the ceiling on which the apprentices had amused themselves with drawing monstrosities with the smoky flare of their tallow dips, the piles of paper and litter heaped up in the corners, intentionally or from sheer neglect, in short, every detail of the picture lying before his eyes, agreed so well with the facts alleged by the Marquise, that the judge, in spite of his impartiality, could not help believing them. "There you are, gentlemen," said the porter's wife. "There is the manufactor, where the Chinese swallow up enough to feed the whole neighbourhood." The clerk looked at the judge with a smile, and Popinot found it hard to keep his countenance. They went together into the outer room, where sat an old man, who no doubt performed the functions of office clerk, shopman, and cashier. This old man was the Maître Jacques of China. Along the walls ran long shelves on which the published numbers lay in piles. A partition in wood, with a grating lined with green curtains, cut off the end of the room, forming a private office. A till, with a slit to admit or disgorge crown pieces, indicated the cash desk. "Monsieur d'Espard?" said Popinot, addressing the man who wore a grey blouse. The shopman opened the door into the next room, where the lawyer and his companion saw a venerable old man, white-headed and simply dressed, wearing the cross of St. Louis, seated at a desk. He ceased comparing some sheets of coloured prints to look up at the two visitors. This room was an unpretentious office, full of books and proof sheets. There was a black wood table, at which some one, at the moment absent, no doubt was accustomed to work. "The Marquis d'Espard?" said Popinot. "No, monsieur," said the old man, rising. "What do you want with him?" he added, coming forward, and showing by his demeanour the dignified manners and habits due to a gentlemanly education. "We wish to speak with him on business exclusively personal to himself," replied Popinot. "D'Espard, here are some gentlemen who want to see you," then said the old man, going into the furthest room, where the Marquis was sitting by the fire, reading the newspaper. End of section 4.